I'm recording my homily for the 32nd Sunday in Ordinary Time, and we are almost at the end of our liturgical year. Next week is Thanksgiving, and then the week after that we have the feast day of Christ the King, and then we enter into Advent. So it's kind of exciting. This week I continued with a theme that had been from last week, but not necessarily in my homily, but it was in a talk that one of my parishioners gave on stewardship. And so I'm going to continue with that a little bit, and I realize some of my views on stewardship sometimes might be a bit extreme, and they've always been that way. And I can't say necessarily if I'm right or wrong, but I always try to model stewardship the way Jesus did it, and sometimes he was extreme, right? Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about stewardship. So in the gospel this weekend, what we had was the widow's mite, right? So Jesus is sitting there at the temple. He's sitting there in front of the treasury, and he's watching people put their money in. And so you can think of the analogy of, just as us as Catholics and how we fit into that giving of our stewardship to the church. Okay, so Jesus is there watching. Now, some wealthy people put in a lot of money. Right? Okay, he doesn't say anything bad about it, but it was out of their surplus. They weren't giving everything. In other words, they weren't making a huge sacrifice by doing it, but they were giving a lot. Okay, and then you have the widow who comes up and she gives virtually nothing to the temple. If you were the administrator of the temple and you were to see how much she gave, she would say, this is basically worthless for the sake of the operations of the temple. But Jesus sees stewardship differently. He sees the Catholic Church, his bride, he sees us differently. He wants us to behave differently. And so what we value is not going to be of material significance. So he calls his disciples, he says, look, I want you to see what she's done. And so it wasn't the 2 cents, it wasn't the littleness, it wasn't the greatness, but it was everything. Now, does this mean when you come to Mass, you need to give every last penny you have? No. But what impressed Jesus so much was if he could see inside of her that she had this freedom. She had the freedom to give everything. I don't know if you've ever had a moment like that where you really just felt for someone and you just emptied your wallet, right? You just gave all the cash that you had, you just gave it to them, right? And so even though you could just go to the ATM and get more, but in that moment you gave them everything that you had. And so there's a freedom to be able to say, I'm not going to think of myself in this moment, I'm going to think completely of the sake of the other. Now, I think what also impressed Jesus was that she's like these people who just have such simple faith that they're not caught up in the politics, they're not caught up in the leadership, they trust that God is working. And so they want to give of themselves to that. That's what impressed Jesus so much. Now, I want to talk just really quickly about the first part of the gospel, which is the warning for all church leaders. And so it was the warning back then, and it is the warning today. And so what he notices in the church leaders is that they're corrupt, that all they care about is money. All they want is honor and prestige and money and fame and power and all those things that go with it. And that is truly corruption. And so he says they will receive a severe condemnation. Those are Jesus' words. And so as a church leader, as a priest, I have to listen to that very carefully and say, how do I measure generosity? How do I measure success in the church? Is it by how much people are giving? Or is it by me having the ability like Jesus to see into each person's heart and say, that's what I want. I want the person to be able to give everything. Now again, we're not talking about money per se, right? So when I as an administrator begin to want people to give more money, or I begin to ask them to give more money, have I already betrayed Jesus' model? His model of doing things. His understanding of stewardship. If I ask people to give more money, have I betrayed Jesus' model of stewardship? Now, here's the thing. And I don't think I'm wrong on this, but I could be. Jesus never, ever asked people for money. Not once. But he expected people to give completely, right? Remember the rich young man? He couldn't give away. He couldn't give away everything. He couldn't give of himself completely. And so he went away sad. Whenever Jesus honors someone, it's when they throw themselves completely into the situation. And so he says, never have I seen such great faith. Never have I seen such great faith. It's watching someone give themselves so wholly and completely. And so that is stewardship. Can you imagine what it would be like if the Catholic Church never once asked for money? Now, here's the thing. Do we need money? Yes. Did Jesus need money? Yes. For his disciples, I'm sure they would have bought food, they would have stayed in places, they would have used money on some level, right? And back then they probably had more bartering going on, but they would have used money. Parents, moms and dads, do you need money to raise your kids? Do your kids cost money? Right? Do you have to pay for their food? Do you have to pay for their clothing, for the things that you just provide for them, medical care and supplies for school and sports and just all those things? Does that take money? Yes, it does. But is that the point? Do you ever ask your kids for money? Right? No, it usually goes the other way around, right? Or can you imagine if you had a lot of money, you said, you know what, I think I can hire someone to raise my kids. I'll pay someone to raise my kids. That would be absurd. Well, so I think some wealthy people do kind of do that, but would anybody ever pin on them, Mother of the Year award or Father of the Year award? No, because they've delegated their responsibility to love their children and raise them. Okay, and so yes, money's necessary in the world we live in, but do we live for it? Or is that the purpose? Or is money the key to, I'm going to bring it back to the church, is money the key to happiness in the church? Is it the key to us being successful? And so if we take Jesus' model, his radical model is, money is not necessary to be successful in the church. And that's a hard lesson. I feel like such a hypocrite for saying that. Because how often I think, boy, it'd be nice if people just gave a little bit more. We could do so much more. But that's the trap. That's not true. It is not true. What we need to give is 100% of ourselves. All right? Okay. How about some examples of this, right? We just celebrated Veterans Day yesterday. Veterans Day. Those of you who are veterans, did you join the military thinking, I hope I get rich? Probably not, right? Nobody's going to get rich joining the military. But did everybody who joined them, at least on some level, did they have in their mind, I want to serve. I want to serve the country. I want to be a part of something bigger than myself. I want to do something good for our world. I want to be a part of a mission, right? I was talking with a group the other day, and I think it was our men's group, and at some point I brought up the idea just of, the midlife crisis, how men have a midlife crisis, and then they go out and buy a Corvette or something. But what causes a midlife crisis? Well, there's this moment where we as men, and I suppose this could happen to women too, but we as men, there's a moment when we realize that we are not part of something bigger than ourselves. That we have not given ourselves over to a mission that's bigger than ourselves, and we don't have the freedom to do it. We perhaps have played it safe, or we've always been concerned about ourselves, or we've always been saving all our money for rainy day and for our kids' education and all these things. But we've never been a part of something bigger than ourselves. And hence the midlife crisis, right? And so the church is designed to fulfill that desire that we are part of something bigger than ourselves. And so in that we find fulfillment. But the freedom to give ourselves completely, like the widow, again, it is not necessarily about money, right? but to give of ourselves 100%. On Sunday, we were celebrating the feast day of St. Martin of Tours, and you've probably seen paintings of him, and I'm sure you're familiar with him. St. Martin of Tours was a soldier in the Roman army. He was a good soldier in the Roman army. He was very talented in that manner, but he enjoyed being part of that mission, right? But he discovered a better mission. He discovered something even more powerful than the Roman army, which was our Catholic faith. And he was so taken by it. So there's this scene, and we often depict it in paintings. He's in his armor as a soldier, right? But he encounters this beggar who is lying beside him, and he's up on his horse, and he's up on the horse, and it symbolizes just all this power and dignity that he has as a soldier. And the beggar's lying on the ground with nothing, just absolutely nothing. And so he takes his cloak, and he takes his sword, he cuts his cloak in half, and then gives half of it to the beggar. And now, so the symbolism, the half is, he's seeing him as his equal, as his brother. And so it's like to love your neighbor as yourself. He's giving as he would give to himself. He gives himself half, he gives him half. And he sees him as his equal. Now, St. Martin of Tours would go on to not just give half, he would give whole, right? He would grow. That was the beginning of his understanding of true stewardship, to see his brother as his equal and the desire to give in that manner. So this is a powerful example of that. Just one more example. So today, the day I'm recording this, is the feast day of St. Frances Cabrini, which I love because I was pastor at St. Frances Cabrini for 8 years. And so I have a very fond connection to her, and often ask for her intercession. She's a patroness of immigrants. I think we need that. We need some prayer there. We need some help there. So just, when she was growing up, her life wasn't easy. And while she was off at college, she was studying to become a teacher. Both of her parents died, as well as one of her sisters. And I think it was influenza or something was happening there. And so she comes back home to help raise the family, to raise the rest of the kids. And in the process, she discerns her vocation. She always wanted to be a missionary. She always wanted to go to China. She dreamed of going to China to be a missionary, to be a teacher. So she eventually enters a religious life, but it's a horrible experience. She's in this convent. She's in this religious order where the Mother Superior is a severe alcoholic. She's verbally abusive. Just a horrible situation. And so she, Sister Cabrini, St. Cabrini, she talks to the bishop, and she's like, "Bishop, this is just horrible. I just need to get out of here." And he's like, "Be patient, be patient, be patient." So the thing was, he knew that she was holy. He knew that when she was ready, she could do great things. So when she was ready, he gives basically this order over to Mother Cabrini, or she becomes Mother Cabrini, and she reforms it, and they become really, really great. Well, when she's ready, she goes to the Pope, and she says, "Look, we want to go to China. We want to go to China." And the Pope says, you know where we really need you? We really need you in America. Because we have all these Italian immigrants going to America, and they're just abandoned. There's nobody to help them. And they're getting kind of abused, they're getting kind of beat up. And so he sends her to America, and she humbly obeys. Well, while she's here, she's the only saint who's actually worked in Seattle, in the Seattle area. So she's kind of special for all of us here in Western Washington. But her home base basically is Chicago, and she spends a lot of time there. And there was this one day she was reading the newspaper, and she was reading about some Italian immigrants down in Louisiana. And what had happened, they had been accused of murder, and they were put on trial, and they were actually proven innocent, or at least not proven guilty. And they're released. Well, the people are so upset that they formed this mob, and they went after them and killed them. So she's reading this article, and she gathers her sisters, and she just really says one thing to them. She just says, they need Jesus. They need Jesus. And so she asks for her sisters for volunteers, and she gets a group of sisters together and sends them down to Louisiana to found a house, a religious house down there, and just to bring them Jesus. Now that's That's the freedom of stewardship. That's the freedom of people who've given themselves 100%, that they can do just such beautiful things that way. So I think in the context of our own lives where Jesus Christ is working, is to have the freedom to give 100%, whatever it may be. And hopefully the Catholic Church as well. Hopefully the Catholic Church has the freedom to give 100% and understand where that true 100% comes from. It comes from the faith, it comes from people actualizing the faith in their life 100%. All right, I think I said 100% too many times there. Anyways, God bless you, and I'll see you next week.